Hi, I'm Michael with Form Kitchens, and welcome to Trading Ideas. This is a podcast series where we talk to innovative and creative thinkers in the design and build environment. Today's episode is a great look at really how you can build your own network, which will not only add value to what you're doing, but will add value to the greater design and build industry. We had the great fortune of talking to Ed Thompson from Brick and Wonder, which is a global collective of design thinkers and real estate professionals who are trying to move the industry forward through community and collaborative thinking. I really think you'll enjoy this episode, and we look forward to providing more conversations to you. Well, thanks for joining us today, Ed. Really excited to talk today about Brick and Wonder. You know, you've done such a wonderful job building this really engaged, active, interesting trade community in New York called Brick and Wonder, and really excited to get into that. But I'd love to back up a little bit and just start with, what is your story? What were you doing before Brick and Wonder? What led you to Brick and Wonder? And would really just love to hear the run up to this wonderful community that you've created.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, and thank you for having me. Really great to be here with you today. I'm originally from the UK. My background has been in startups mostly, and a few of the projects I've worked on in the past had a kind of community business model dimension to them. So I originally got involved with Brick and Wonder. I met Drew. He'd kind of reached out trying to find someone to help with digital strategy, thinking about what Brick and Wonder was going to be. As an architect and as a developer, he'd had a set of experiences in the industry that had led him to the idea of the possibility of doing something that it was not very clear what that something was going to be. There were lots of gaps, lots of pain points, and different experiences, especially around the development practice in the studio, that had kind of led to some questions. And so I got involved really early on. They'd named Brick and Wonder and come up with a kind of preliminary brand for it, but we weren't clear what it was going to be. So when I was first working on it, we were doing some exploration around different potential business models, different directions we could go in. And we eventually settled on a kind of community model where, rather than focusing on creating value just for one part of the industry, just for architects, say, or just for real estate brokers was another area we were interested in, we decided that what was needed is some kind of community that brings really a diverse range of different professionals together. And we can go into more detail on that. But I think that was kind of the genesis of it, or my involvement in it, and the alignment that I felt with digging into this industry. And I'd had a variety of different kind of industry experiences before. What seemed engaging and interesting about this was this sense of like trying to address all these different audiences, trying to address all these different components of the industry, and just try to kind of make the work better and kind of work better. And I think that's sort of speaks to what we're trying to do with Brick and Wonder. And it's fun because we're kind of feeling our way forward. I don't think there's really a great sort of established archetype for what we're trying to do. There are certainly other communities, there are other businesses that do something similar to Brick and Wonder, but we're doing something pretty different, I think. So that's kept it kind of fresh and kept it challenging, and yeah, kept it pretty fun. So I kind of started out consulting and ended up consulting my way into a full-time role.
And what was that aha moment that made you go, oh, it's the community piece that we need to solve?
That's a great question. We first started out thinking around a kind of community with a business referral tool in the middle. So the idea was to try to be kind of a source of referrals for different practitioners in the industry. We knew that most business, so, you know, if you think of, let's just step back a minute. We think of the built environment industry very broadly, right? So there's architecture, design, construction, development. There's all these other pieces to that as well. And there's all these kind of material suppliers and vendors and sub kind of contractors and so on that are involved in things. So I think we had this sense of thinking of it more like an ecosystem, and more kind of sort of in this sort of like all these different professions need to work together to do projects. So let's bring them together and that be the starting place. But what we quickly realized is that we couldn't be a sustainable source of project opportunities for all these different types of professions. We couldn't provide, running list of interior design opportunities and a running list of kitchen install opportunities and structural engineering opportunities. And so the idea of having projects and business opportunities at the center really kind of failed. And we kind of put some serious effort into that path for a couple of years, and it didn't work. But what we did while we were doing that is we started running roundtable sessions and getting diverse professionals kind of around a table and having discussions about things in the industry or things that relate to business. And we really found kind of some traction there. I think we found people were interested in having this cross-disciplinary conversation. And it was interesting because you would see, a real estate attorney talk about a way that they do a certain thing in their business. And then you'd see a photographer across the table have kind of a light bulb moment of like, that's a really good idea. Like, I should do that in my business. And we realized that, I guess, that because the industry is made up of small and medium-sized businesses, everyone has kind of two spheres of interest, right? They have the work they do. They might be an interior designer. They're focused on client relationships and designing interiors, but they're also an entrepreneur, and they have to think about marketing and brand and hiring and firing and retention and operations, finance, strategy, accounting. They've just got their head in these two different headspaces, like the entrepreneur's headspace and the operator's headspace. And we could kind of create programming that could live in those two different spheres and create a lot of value for small and medium-sized businesses, especially in the built environment industry. So when we decided, okay, we can't do this, we can't be this referral source for all these projects, but we do feel like we've got a little bit of traction on the community side. We really just doubled down on the community side. And that was what led to, about 3 years ago, kind of establishing Brick and Wonder as a relatively small community of curated professionals who tend to be business owners and founders. And we have about 40 plus different professional categories in the community. They range from specialty fabricators to real estate brokers to lawyers, accountants, brand designers, photographers, obviously architects, developers, interior designers, GCs. We're agnostic about project types, so our members work on residential, commercial, hospitality, cultural, even urban planning and strategy projects. And again, because we think of this as an ecosystem, it's complex, right? It's a very complex web of these different relationships and connections, but it is a way of looking at the industry in a less siloed way than it's been kind of typically addressed. I think you in the past, people have said A&D over here and construction over here and development over here. And they're all these separate things. And there's specialized groups for the interior designers hang out in this little niche and the architects hang out in this little niche. And it's very siloed. You end up with sort of very specific programming that helps them in very specific ways, but doesn't necessarily help them engage with this cross-disciplinary group of collaborators. And I think that's the thing we've hit on with Brick and Wonder that seems to be, making a difference for people.
Totally. And it's so wild to think that it was so siloed when you think about, the execution of a project. It takes so many different disciplines to make something actually happen. And so it just feels intuitive, probably in hindsight, to bring all these people around the table and start having these conversations. Something I want to go back to is sort of the magic of having these different disciplines in one sort of, whether it's digital space or physical space. But can you talk more about the value of sort of that cross-discipline group you've brought together? Because you're talking about, what happens when you have a real estate attorney and a GC and an architect sitting in a room. What sort of value does that drive for these small, medium-sized businesses that are trying to find their way in this industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a few different things, really. It ranges very broadly where people get value from it, but part of it is having a peer group of colleagues who are in the same rough space, but not necessarily doing exactly the same thing as you, that you can learn from, right? Someone's we'll have in roundtable discussions, it can get very candid. They tend to be business owners or senior leaders in their organization, and they'll, share, we've just hired the wrong person. It's a disaster. We don't know what to do about it. Help, there aren't a lot of forums where you can have that kind of conversation and really trust the other people in the room to sort of, meet you where you're at and share their experiences in a candid way and get at the value of of helping problem solve those things. So, it ranges from things like that, like we need help with this, to, sparking ideas of like, well, someone's doing this in their marketing and it's been really effective for them. Like, well, I could do that too. That's within reach. What consultant are you using to help you do that? And let's get them connected. So, these small things, they're sort of interstitial little moments. And then, of course, there are transactions, right? Someone might be like, yeah, we're working on this new project and we're looking for a structural engineer. The one we normally use is not available, or they're not the right fit for this project. Does anyone know someone who's like, and then someone else across the room is like, yes, we'll get you connected to this structural engineer we recommend and we think they'd be a great fit. So before you know it, you've kind of time solved a big headache of like going out and finding the right person, and someone's got a new business opportunity, which is great. I think one of the ways we think about what Brick and Wonder does is it provides a context for a place to put relationships between projects that's meaningful and additive. So as we're incubated by an architecture studio, the architecture studio may work with a GC who's great for a particular project. It's a really great relationship. It goes really well. Everyone's happy. I mean, it's never like a total basket of roses, but it's like, it goes well. And we're like, we'd love to work with those people again. But then there's not another project to just go straight into from there, right? The next project might be a different kind of building. It might be, might be years before you can really engage with that person again in a transactional way. So what do you do with that relationship that you really valued in the time between the first project and whenever there might be another one in the future? You kind of need some vehicle to carry that relationship, to nurture it, to deepen it, to build that connection. And community is a great vehicle for that. We really, all it is just spending time with these people, getting to know them, sharing resources with them, integrating them into your conversation, into your workflow, learning alongside each other. And then, when the project comes around in the future, those resources are kind of ready at hand. You already have a deeper relationship and connection with them. It's easy to jump into that project with them. But I think, the other way of doing it is you just kind of like have these great successful relationships, and, maybe you keep going back to the same people and trying to kind of make it work no matter what the project, which is not really a great formula for success, or you just kind of let these relationships drift off and, maybe reach out again in a few years and, you're kind of starting from scratch again. I think Brick and Wonder is trying to be this vehicle for nurturing and deepening those relationships over time in between projects, which is why for us, like, the transaction is not at the center of the community. It's all that other stuff that happens that's sort of the glue that holds it together.
I love that. And what a time too, right? I think 2022 was this interesting crucible, so to speak, particularly for this industry, right? Where I think a lot of industries got hurt, but, this design and home and build industry kind of had a boon in 2020. And as we emerge from all that, I think, there is an intense craving for community, right? I think as we get back out and collaborate and forge new relationships, we're not only looking for that sense of community, but we're looking for, like, how do you build businesses in today's day and age? So I'd love to understand, what are you hearing from the community in terms of what's it like to build a new business in this industry, kind of coming out of 2020 with, I think, new ways of working, new tools, new technology, new consumer preferences. Are there any big themes you're noticing from your community?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And on the subject of the pandemic, I think it was an interesting moment for us. We'd really just kind of figured out what our model was going to be. And then the pandemic hit us and we were like, oh, now we're really, this is going to be difficult. We were pretty worried. But what we found is that in a pandemic, in a crisis, people turn to their colleagues and their peers to sort of navigate it together. And so actually, we found our membership growth accelerated during the pandemic because people felt that extra need for community, for connection, for sort of resources and support from other practitioners. So it was a strange result for us because it sort of was very unexpected, but it was helpful. And then it also, as you said, kind of taught us these new ways of working. Before the pandemic, we pretty much had a phone call with everyone who was interested in joining the community, or we met them in person. And ever since the pandemic, we've had a Zoom call. And I feel like that sense of connection, that ability to convey what we do, that ability to put a kind of face to explaining how we operate has been just really valuable and continues to be valuable. And it ultimately has helped us to kind of scale, much more efficiently than running around town, going to meetings all day. So those things, of course, that, very clear trends that we've seen. I think, trend-wise, I agree with you. I feel like the industry has had a bit of a boon as kind of consumers have turned inwards a little. They've kind of taken a look at their space, and they've realized these new things about their space. Like, I do actually need a space to work from home, and there wasn't really that need before. But now so many people are working hybrid or fully remote that that's really a space people want in their lives. So there's those kinds of trends. We definitely see in the Brick and Wonder community a yearning to get back into in-person engagement and conversation with peers. I think people are hungry for programming and content and events and experiences that are meaningful, that bring them together with their colleagues, that facilitate relationship building. And as much as the pandemic helped us understand the dynamics of Zoom and running Zoom workshops and helping facilitate relationship building among our members via Zoom, it's very clear that there is no substitute for getting together in person and having real conversations with people in a room, in a shared experience. That is the kind of interaction that brings about the most connectivity and kind of consequential relationship building for our members. And in a way, I feel very grateful to know that that's true, right? It's like tells you something pretty nice about humanity, that like we just need to be in a room together and hang out. And that's what drives relationship building. As much as this technology can help us, that's the good stuff. So that's really cool as well.
Stepping outside of Brick and Wonder, are there things in the industry you're excited about, whether it's new materials, new processes, new aesthetics? I mean, what personally gets you excited about the industry as you look out toward 2023 and beyond?
I think there's a lot happening that's exciting. A few of the, I think the things that I get the most excited about are innovations towards more sustainable design and more sustainable building. We have a set of ideas that we haven't really kind of resolved how to action within Brick and Wonder, which sort of I've been kind of spearheading around what kind of a better built world looks like what kind of practices as designers and as builders and as materials companies and as design manufacturers like Form, what are we doing to make the whole thing better, right? And I think it has to do with, like, for example, I'm pretty interested in, there's a company called Biomason, which is a concrete company that is trying to create carbon negative concrete. So it's actually, the concrete itself becomes a carbon sink. Right now, concrete is a massive carbon emitter. It's a really heat and energy intensive process to create concrete, then off gases, carbon when it's setting. It's a terrible material from the point of view of the environment. But there are ways to do some really interesting things around it. There's another company called Blue Planet Concrete, which is capturing carbon from the air and then kind of forming it into these little pellets and then putting that into concrete as a form of aggregate. I'm super excited about that because the built environment industry, everyone thinks of like their personal carbon footprint, right? It's sort of the legacy of what the oil companies have led us to, this idea that we're the ones responsible for our personal carbon footprint is the thing that's driving it. That's really not the truth, right? We tend to worry about like, am I flying too much? Am I driving? Is my car efficient? I mean, yes, like get those things right. But the built environment is responsible for about 40% of carbon emissions globally. And so it's a really huge opportunity to address, humanity's damage that we're doing to the planet. And some of these materials and processes are really exciting ways to tackle that. Another company I'm excited about is Icon Builds. So they're 3D printing homes. They have these large, giant 3D printers that sort of just travel across the plan of a home and layer up, the concrete into the walls. So I think just in terms of sustainability, there's a ton of innovation there and a ton of potential. And then from a design point of view, you have the supporting practices around designing passive houses, for example. And there are members in the Brick and Wonder community who are going super deep on that, retrofitting townhouses, which really that's not the ideal kind of building to be a passive house. They're not they don't lend themselves to it, but it's perfectly possible to make a building that basically uses net zero energy in Brooklyn, in cold weather. It's possible, right? So with these design solutions and with design thinking and with hopefully an increasing consumer appetite for what will be more energy efficient homes, more affordable homes, and so on. I think there's a lot of potential there as well. So I think the sustainability side of the industry excites me a lot. Yeah.
That's what I love about Brick and Wonder. It's not about just creating value for your members, but how you as a collective can create value for the larger industry. And, design at the end of the day is problem solving, and to take all these disparate and diverse thinkers and try to solve problems as a collective as well, not just for each other, but for the industry, I think is so noble and so interesting. I think that's why there's such a good energy in the community, because it feels very purpose-led and very, very mission-led.
Thank you.
One final question I do want to ask, and then I have a couple throwaways at the end, but, as individuals, whether you're a designer, architect, or GC, as individuals go out and look for community, maybe they're not in New York, maybe they're elsewhere in the country. What would you encourage those individuals to look for, or what sort of words of inspiration would you give to someone as you go out to find that sort of new level of collaboration and community?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think one of the things that we've learned is that it's sort of community begets community, which is that you kind of have to start somewhere. And this was actually, I think, one of the things I'd had some experience with building communities in the past, and I knew building communities is really hard. It's starting from scratch. It's kind of like, the rubbing two sticks together in the forest, hoping to make a spark and get a fire going. You really just have to keep rubbing until it goes. So it's kind of like there's that piece to it, and I would encourage people to take the initiative to find ways to build community, and it can be super simple things like you have maybe you have a showroom or a small office in your town or your city or wherever you're based, and you just invite colleagues in the industry once a month to come and have some drinks. But everyone's used to this idea of having their own team have some drinks at the end of the month, the end of the week, whatever it is. I think just invite other people, invite people who you'd like to work with, invite people who you have worked with, invite their friends. It kind of, you have to just sort of throw a little bit of energy at it and see what sticks. But if you build community around what you're doing, your kind of value to your colleagues is increased. And I think you get, there's a sort of reciprocal energy that flows back and forth. And it's really just a question of getting started. We have, a member in LA who runs a tennis, it's like a kind of tennis hangout. They'll just get a bunch of people in the industry together and go and play tennis in one afternoon once a month. And that's a form of community gathering, and it's popular and people love it, and it's getting to spend time with colleagues in the industry. It's interdisciplinary, and it's fun. So I think it's if you make it fun, make it simple, and you engage diverse colleagues, you're off to the right start, I would say.
And I think you've really inspired that at Form by being members of Brick and Wonder. We've learned that if you just show up authentically and communicate authentically and take the time to just send a note or an email, I think you'll be surprised by the results you get. And I think there's so many interesting people and interesting businesses in this industry, and it keeps proliferating, right? More interesting ones come to the table, and there's just so much value to get from talking with someone, right? It doesn't have to be about a business transaction. It doesn't have to be about business development. It can be the cost of talking to someone for 15 minutes. And I think you end up getting a lot of value from doing that. I've met so many wonderful people who have just become friends and sounding boards. And I think it's made our thinking that much more interesting on Formside. So I think that's something you all have really put into your community is just take the time, be authentic and be open, and you'll probably be surprised with the results you get.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like by doing that, you're opening yourself up to the serendipity of whatever your network brings you. And that is a pretty powerful tool. It just requires being open to it and putting yourself in a position where you're open to that 15 minutes and you don't see everything through the lens of transacting.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Got to know, why the name Brick and Wonder?
Well, I must say it was chosen before I joined, so I'm not responsible for that. But I love the name, actually. I think it kind of gets at a couple of ideas which are pretty central. So we're based in the built environment industry. In the end, it's about buildings. It's about, the spaces that we live, that we work, that we play, that we urbanize. So it's about the kind of material results of our effort as an industry, the brick side. And then the wonder side, I think, is really about like this idea of how can it be better? How can our relationships in the industry be better and move us forward as an industry? And how can we make better buildings that have better qualities, that are more affordable, that are more sustainable, that are more energy efficient, that are more beautiful, that are more integrated into the communities where they're built, that are more sensitive to their impact on nature and wildlife and biodiversity. So there's the reality of building buildings and building places, and then there's the kind of aspiration to do that at the highest level that we can.
That's great. Well, how can people get involved, whether they're in New York or elsewhere in the country, and where should people go to find out more about Brick and Wonder?
You can go to brickandwonder.com and take a look there. You can see a kind of directory of some of the members who are in the community, which is great. And if you're interested in what we're doing, feel free to apply for membership and we'll be in touch.
Sounds great. Well, we appreciate you taking the time, Ed. We very much value being members of your community, and I think what you all are doing is imperative for these small and medium-sized businesses who are trying to find their way. And it's just an incredible way to get value and get insights and get exposure to where things are heading. And so kudos to what you've built. And we're excited to see what 2023 brings for Brick and Wonder and obviously beyond.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much for participating. We've loved having you guys as members, and I'm sure there's lots more we can do together in the future, which is super exciting.
Well, thanks, Ed. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, it's been great chatting.